For you that don't know me, my name is Dr. Jennifer Gonzalez. I'm a clinical trial liaison that focuses on helping doctors in IMG develop their career in clinical trials. Today with me is Dr. Ross Prager. He is an ICU doctor from Canada and he teaches residents. So he's well aware how to teach us to navigate this new skill in writing a protocol. Okay, so I have not written a protocol. I am new with you guys and very, very excited to be here and very excited about the collaboration that Dr. Prager and I have. So if you have questions, drop them there. Dr. Prager, please go ahead, all yours.
Wonderful. Well, I'll share my screen and just give a little bit of an intro into myself here. I apologize in advance. I'm going to be bouncing around a little bit to show you guys some different things. So just bear with me. And if there's any AV questions or AV issues and you can't see what I'm talking about, please let Jen know because it's probably me sharing the wrong tab at a certain time. So a little bit about me. I'm an ICU doctor, clinical researcher, professor at Western University in London, Canada. So on the left there, you can see London, Canada. It's located kind of midway between Detroit and Toronto, for those of you familiar with North America. It's about 500,000 people live here. It's a beautiful city. Maybe not quite as beautiful as that photo, but there's definitely really beautiful areas and a river that runs through it. In London, Canada, we name everything after London, England. So the river you see there is the Thames River, and there's Oxford Street and all the famous streets along it. And Western University is a great university and really nice to teach there. On top of that, I'm also the founder of an AI startup called Resub.app, which is an AI writing and kind of formatting tool. So I just wanted to kind of make that disclosure from the get-go, but then also say that really my interaction with AI at a deeper level is something that I hope I can share some tips and tricks to utilize new technologies in a really responsible way for your own writing. And so throughout the webinar series, I'll be pointing to various tools that might be able to help you. So my start to clinical research. So in my undergrad, I did kind of benchtop research, which wasn't really for me. But my start to clinical research, which I really enjoyed, started at Pemberton Music Festival, which is a music festival in Canada in the middle of the mountains. So this was there lots of music festival activities going on, as you could imagine. And we were like, all right, I'm interested in ultrasound. I want to understand how ultrasound could be brought to a remote multi-day music festival and potentially improve patient care. And so we applied for ethics. We didn't really write any protocol for it. And then we got there and we kind of had data collection forms and we collected data. And if you read this paper, it's not very good. There's a lot of limitations to the methodology. There was lots of data we wish we'd collected that we didn't collect. And I was like, doing research is a lot harder than just writing the paper. And for this study in particular, it felt like we got collected the data and then spent like a year writing the manuscript. And I was like, I feel like if we'd planned things a little bit better, the manuscript writing would have been much easier. And so this kind of led me to my research that I did in my residency, where I connected with a good mentor, Dr. Matthew McInnes, who's a radiologist, but also the lead author on a number of like reporting guidelines and just an excellent methodologist. And the thing that he really instilled into me was if you spend more time writing your protocol, writing the paper becomes very easy because a protocol is actually just your manuscript minus the data. And if you spend more time up front, the tail end of writing your manuscript and getting it published in a journal that you're really happy about, that becomes much easier. And so that's hopefully what we can demonstrate through this webinar series is how can we write even better and higher quality protocols. And so why are protocols so important? I really view a research protocol as the recipe for your study. And if you go to cook in the kitchen and you just have a recipe that says like add chicken, add lemon, and bake, you're not going to produce the best chicken. How long do you bake it for? What temperature? Are there any other spices? And trying to figure it out on the fly can be a little bit difficult. And similarly, when you're doing research, if you don't have a detailed protocol, a lot of things you don't think of ahead of time, and then down the road you realize that they were critical to actually making the study that you really wanted to make. And so this is how I think about it this kind of research protocol generation. And I'm just
I
looking
see
at
it
the
like
chat
that too.
here as I'm going. So, any questions so far? No? All right. So I would say that there's kind of two different types of protocols in my mind. Um, the first is what I would call an internal protocol. And this is an extremely detailed protocol that will inform exactly how you and your team will recruit, collect data, analyze the results, and it really helps frame the story of the manuscript. That's what we're going to spend our time here together talking about and really generating together. But then there's what I would call more of like the registration protocol, where you publish your protocol on clinicaltrials.gov. You publish it on Prospero or Open Science Framework. And in my mind, if you create a really good internal protocol, it's easy to extract that information into these other platforms. And so I always design my protocols to be as comprehensive as possible, and then I simplify them for whatever platform they need to go to. And you know what, we sent this out ahead of time from the webinar. Don't start your research from scratch. These are protocols that are protocol templates for randomized controlled trials, observational studies that have all the sections you're going to need to complete a really high quality manuscript or protocol. And so if you go to this QR code, which I'll display at the end as well, put in your email, you can download these from a Google Drive and you can use them for your own research. They have all the subheadings you'll need for different studies and for like systematic reviews, for example, they'll have like grading of evidence and tables for that and whatnot with links and stuff to useful reporting guideline checklists. So I would definitely encourage you to do that. So, and here they are. And so I'm going to show you a current protocol for something that I just recently kind of I'm working on. We haven't even submitted the paper yet, so we published the protocol maybe a month ago, and hopefully I can now show you protocol so that you can see a little bit about what this looks like. Share screen again. And then we're going to kind of go through this protocol and grade different things and see what is in a protocol that and how I write it and what else can we add. So I start off with kind of a title page. And one thing you'll notice is that this probably looks very, very similar to a research manuscript. And that's because in my mind, the protocol becomes the manuscript. They're actually totally identical. So I have a title, a running title, all the authors. Now, a big tip is when authorship can be a contentious point of writing a study. In fact, authorship disputes are probably one of the biggest preventable causes of disagreement between authors. And I mean, they're silly to begin with because really we should all be collaborating, but they are important for promotion and first author versus last author versus second author. The easiest way to avoid that you ever get in an authorship dispute is publish the authorship order in your protocol. Because if it's in your protocol and then somebody down the road says, no, I want to be first author, you're just like, hey, you saw the protocol. I sent you the protocol and you weren't first author. No, like this was the authorship that we've established from beforehand. And it has to be reflective then of the work and the contributions of individuals throughout the study. Then kind of go through some conflict of interest and funding, and then I start with an introduction, and this is we've actually revised this very heavily for our manuscript that we're writing up because this wasn't a very good introduction, I must say. But in general, your introduction should be very similar to how you would write your introduction for a manuscript, and we're going to talk about that actually next week on our webinar. Is how do you write a really high quality introduction with a problem, a gap, a hook? What are kind of do's and don'ts when it comes to writing an introduction? And then we go into the methods. And as you'll be able to see from the methods, we are being hyper specific in the methods. We're kind of clarifying everything down to, for this study, we were looking at can large language models approximate the results of meta-analyses essentially without like any kind of systematic review needing to be performed. And we specified exactly what journals that we're going to be publishing in, sample size, detailed study inclusion, exactly how and what we're going to be extracting from a study identifier, demographics, eligibility, the results, definitions about kind of ground truth and deep research models, like what we're going to be doing with that, the exact outcomes we're going to be looking at, sample size calculation, pre-specified secondary analyses, and then how we're actually going to analyze the data when it comes to. And now this sounds like a lot, but again, if you use a template, it'll guide you through and walk you through the different things you need to consider for each study type. So when most people generate a protocol, they think, all right, sure, we'll do a bit of demographic information at the beginning. Then we'll go on to the introduction, the background, the why are we doing this research. And then we're going to go on to the methods and we'll outline the methods. And most people stop there. But I would argue that's only half of the battle. And what I really advocate for, and this was, of course, taught to me from my mentors who are much better at this than I am, even, is go one step further and do your results as well. And the reason why is if you create extremely detailed results templates essentially for what results you expect, it'll prompt you to be like, oh, actually, we need to collect this data. Because when you go through the process of figuring out what demographics, what outcomes, what figures even you're going to make, you'll start realizing, oh, actually, if we collected that, that would help improve the study even further. And so for this, for example, we created a exact study demographic table, which is blank because we don't have any data yet. We actually put in some dummy data just to play around with what this would feel like for the results of the study here, for our primary outcome. And then we even went and created like a sample of how we could display the results in terms of a figure form. So we created something to say, all right, how could we visualize this data? Because that might actually inform what data we're collecting. And then we thought, all right, what are the different appendices we're going to have? So for example, the prompts that we're using in the instructions, we're going to have study inclusion and exclusion criteria in those, and then a detailed reference list. Now, I know that was a lot of information here, so I'm just going to pause for a second and see if anyone has questions. We're going to go through some tips and tricks here in a bit more detail with this protocol, and we're actually going to analyze this protocol again with kind of a checklist of things to include for a protocol, but I just wanted to pause here for a second and see. Yeah, so I see some comments about the kind of authorship idea up front. The one caveat I'd say is sometimes the relative contributions throughout a study change, but one important thing about having authorship up front is it really designates who is going to be really driving the project forward. Because the first author, to get first authorship on the paper, you're going to be the person that is dealing with the reviews and taking revisions and incorporating them and helping apply for ethics in most situations. Sometimes it's a bit more distributed. But so designating that person up front as, hey, you are going to be first author, but you also have these responsibilities. So tying the authorship order with expectations for what people are going to be contributing to the study so that there's no miscommunication down the road. Yeah, and a great question from Albert Chang is just, is this outline modeled after some guidance documents? Yes and no. So it is because I've integrated the reporting guideline checklist from Equator Network and a lot of the things that need to be reported in each studies according to Prisma or STARD or STROBE for observational studies, all these checklists that say what you should be including in your manuscript. And I've built those into the templates, but you could use any template you want as long as it's comprehensive. And Equator Network reporting guidelines are a good place to start. And then a good question from Sadaf is just like, what's the protocol's purpose? Yeah, great question. So the purpose of a protocol is to really define what study are you doing, why are you doing the study, and exactly how are you going to do the study so that everyone on your team is on the same page and so that you have a recipe book for how to actually do your study. And all you do when you're like, hey, what do we do next? You go to your research protocol and you say, oh, this is the next step along the way. All right, I'm going to share my screen again here. I don't want to show this though. I want to show this. All right. So that was the detailed internal protocol and what I recommend everyone develop when they're first kind of writing the protocol. But then you can go to different individual protocols. So for example, clinicaltrials.gov, and I'll show you what that looks like here. And so this was another study in the UK arm of our randomized controlled trial, Andromeda Shock 2. And you can see that it's a little bit more trimmed down. So if you go to research review, sometimes that's the most helpful. You can see who the contacts are. So some of the administrative issues or administrative considerations, outcomes, the trial description, which is kind of a brief summary with a detailed description, aka the introduction, study type, intervention, study arms, recruitment info with eligibility criteria being the most important. What you can see from this though is that this is a little bit less complete. And the purpose of a registration protocol is so that an external author or peer reviewer or researcher can look to see what you set out to do before you start and understand, all right, what inclusion criteria and outcomes and data analysis methods did you choose from the get-go? And then when you finish your research study, they can compare the two to make sure you haven't changed things. And this avoids people cherry picking key data and saying that, oh, actually, this interesting kind of random finding we found, that was the reason why we did the study. No, 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 no. You published up front that your outcome was X, and now you're saying your outcome was Y. So it creates transparency in the research world, which is very, very relevant for pharmaceutical studies and device studies in particular, but any kind of controlled trial where there's this concept of p-value hacking, where if you run 100 analyses in a study, by chance, a certain percentage of them will show a significant difference if you run a test that generates a p-value. P-value hacking is the process of running tons of analyses, figuring out which ones are positive, and then framing your discussion and your manuscript surrounding the positive results. And the problem with this is if you run enough analyses, you're always going to find positive results by chance. That's just how frequent statistics work. And so this avoids this spin that you can create because you've transparently said, what is my primary outcome and what are my secondary outcomes? And I would highly advocate when you're creating a study to only have one primary outcome. In fact, it's somewhat poor form to have multiple primary outcomes. And some researchers would even go as far to say that if you have multiple primary outcomes, then your threshold for significance, for example, should not be 0.05 if you're going to choose that as your p-value that you'd find something significant. But for every second primary outcome, you should divide it by 2. So if you have 2 primary outcomes, your significance value should be 0.025 instead of 0.5. So that's something that we want to generally avoid. The next one that we can look at if you're doing a systematic review is something called Prospero. And so this is a Prospero protocol for a systematic review we're doing right now. And if you take a look here, it has kind of a introduction section, then it has a very clear kind of PICO or population intervention control and outcome, and we'll talk a little bit about PICO throughout the series here, the study designs that are going to be included, and then what stage search collection and how everything's going to be done, how we're going to analyze the data, including secondary analyses, and then members of the team. And the purpose of this for a systematic review is very, very similar. It's to make sure that we don't duplicate systematic reviews so that me and Jen aren't working on the same systematic review from different parts in the world without us knowing. And to also allow us to then look at the results of the systematic review to ensure that we haven't kind of changed our process along the way because we're like, oh, if we broadened our inclusion criteria, this one study would actually now be allowed into our systematic review, and that study is really positive, so that would support our hypothesis. It really makes you kind of commit to your hypothesis and methods before you start. And then the last one I'll show you, and this is my favorite, and the reason why it's my favorite one to publish my protocols on is because it's the fastest. And so Open Science Framework, OSF, is a free platform where you can publish protocols online and it timestamps them. And it's really, really easy to make a protocol. So all you do, as I say this, it's been a little bit since I've added one. My projects, I think we go. You go to my projects, you create a project, you say test, you can choose where you want to store your data. I'm in Canada, so I want to store it in Canada. You just go to your project there. And then all you do is you upload a link. So you go files and you upload your Word document, whatever protocol you're going to want to do. So you go to OSF storage. No. They've updated the top bar here since I've done this recent. Components, tags, recent activities, make public, bookmark, metadata files, components. Let me see here. Normally, it's all right on here. I might be missing the link here. Anyways, you can just upload a Word document. I swear you can. I've done it many times, but they've updated the UI and I don't know where it is right now off the top of my head. But what you can see is you upload your detailed protocol that you had before, and then you make it public. And so instead of having to copy all that data into clinical trials or Prospero, you actually just have the Word document hosted to everyone to review. And then in my research manuscripts and my protocols, I link to the OSF file and you can get a public link and you just link to there and it'll pull up your Word document or PDF protocol for people to review. So when you click on it here, it'll pull up the same protocol that we just saw and then anyone can review it to check it down the road. And the reason why I like it is you don't have to go and create a registration specific protocol. You just upload your original protocol that you've done for internal purposes, and you can do that externally. So I will pause here and just see if anyone has any more questions. I see some questions in the chat here. What position do we need to be in research to be writing the protocol, and how can we get involved as a coordinator? Any ideas? So great question. I would say that as long as you're part of the kind of investigational team, you can help with writing the protocol. And one of the points that I'm going to make here is that writing a protocol, writing a research study is really a team sport. And so you need to have a principal investigator, and that could be yourself or that could be someone else who has some domain knowledge, who understands the gaps in the literature to be able to come up with a really, really good research question that warrants being answered. And then once that's been made, whoever has that information will help shape the research question. And then anyone in the team can really help flesh out the logistics of the protocol. Okay, from the nuts and bolts, how are we going to recruit patients? What patients should be eligible? That can be a discussion between team members. The next question is, do you include what statistical methods you will use for the study of the protocol? Absolutely. And the reason why is you should know what data you're going to collect because you've already made those shell tables with every single item that you're going to be collecting from your patients. Age, sex, demographics, comorbidities, outcomes, co-interventions, other findings. And so we need to, from the get-go, we should understand how we're going to analyze the data and be transparent about that. In fact, that's probably one of the biggest challenges I see in many research studies is that in my mind, when I'm peer reviewing articles, for example, I see a really good study, a really good question, and then they collected data which maybe was incomplete, and then they get to their analysis and they start doing weird stuff with analysis, and I'm like, why are you doing that analysis? That doesn't make any sense. But when you look at what data they've collected, they've forgotten one or two key variables that would have allowed them to analyze it in a more standard way. And so instead, they at the end of it had to figure out, oh, how are we going to analyze this data? And they start using weird methods that might not be standard or optimal. Um, and then, so how does a research protocol change in a community-based clinical network research site? Good question. I think probably the ownership of who generates the protocol is going to change a little bit. So if you're creating your protocol to like as the investigator yourself, you're going to have more creative freedom versus if you're a site coming on in a larger study, you're going to have to take the existing protocol and perhaps adapt it to local context and then get it kind of approved through local authorities. Jen, actually, you might be able to comment more on that because I don't do as much clinical trial research from like a pharma or regulatory perspective, or I do from a regulatory perspective, but only for medical devices, not from like a pharma perspective. And we don't really recruit other centers as much.
So, when it comes to clinical trials, right, what we are saying is that the writers want to write them to be sometimes decentralized or centralized, and it will be based on what is the question and what they're looking to answer of the patient that they need to recruit so they can adjust the protocol so they include those patients that they are looking for and exclude the ones that they don't want in the study.
Exactly. And then Arena has a good question, but like first we have to obtain the IRB approval of the protocol and the informed consent forms before we can register it. And that's a great point. So yes, because the reason why is the IRB might dictate that you change your protocol or you change your consent forms in some way to comply with their ethical standards or their governing ethics kind of rules and regulations or compliance or privacy or whatever it is. And so yeah, you won't publish your protocol until you have ethics approval. And then as soon as you have ethics approval for that protocol, that's when you would publish it online. But I actually use my the protocol I generate to submit to ethics. And I send that to ethics, and they're like, wow, this is so comprehensive. It's so clear what study you're going to do. And it allows them to actually pinpoint ethical considerations from the get-go. Perfect. All right, I'm going to share my screen again, and let's keep going a little bit here. So we just talked about clinical trials, so great for clinical interventional trials. So I would say if you're doing a randomized controlled trial or an interventional trial in any way, I would publish on clinical trials. If you're doing a systematic review, Prospero is probably the most widely accepted place to publish your protocol. And then I'm a big fan of open science framework because when you figure out how to upload your Word document, which I promise you can, it's very, very easy then to, yeah, it's just really, really easy to publish the protocol that you've already generated there. I just want to make one more point about why we should upload protocols because you might be like, well, I've already made the protocol. Why should I bother putting it out there? As somebody, when I review papers as a peer reviewer, or even just from a transparency and a scientific quality perspective, whenever I see people have pre-registered their protocol and then I look at the protocol and it matches with the study they've done, that's a huge sign of credibility and trust in my mind because it shows that the researchers understand the importance of being transparent about the research that they're doing. With a bunch of AI slop being generated by all these large language models and the pressure to publish more and more papers for researchers, I'd say that there's a great number of studies of questionable methodologic quality, and having a really, really well-defined protocol that you've adhered to is one of the easiest ways to signal that your research is of high quality and merits publication. And in fact, most top journals require a pre-published protocol before they'd even consider it. So if you haven't registered your systematic review protocol, if you haven't registered your trial, you will not be published in a kind of reputable journal for the most part because of how important this is. And so it's just such an easy step to take. It literally takes less than 5 minutes on an open science framework and will set you up to publish in top impact journals. All right. So this is a massive list of things for a protocol, which we're not going to go through here. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through these for my actual protocol that I wrote, and we'll see what I missed because I think I did miss a little bit, and it'll hopefully maybe this will be one of those do as I say, not as I do situations. Like all things in medicine, it's we'll see, we'll see. All right. So the first thing is the administrative information. So I would say that this is kind of the administrative information which we have included. If there's an IRB, for example, make sure to put it in there. If there's an approval number, this was just a meta research study, like a systematic review, which doesn't require REB approval. Background and rationale. So introduction, background and rationale. So there's a bit of a background. And then the last paragraph is kind of the rationale by focusing on. So this raises a crucial question. That's kind of the rationale, for example. I would say that one thing that we didn't do here, which I would highly recommend, is include a hypothesis in your introduction. And we're going to talk about this next week with the introduction. State explicitly what you think will happen in your study. Like if you're studying drug X, we hypothesize that drug X will reduce the rate of stroke in population Y. Stating that explicitly, like it sounds kind of silly, but stating that explicitly is something that is overlooked and is actually helpful down the road. And I'll explain why. The study design overview. So this meta research study, so it's a meta research study. We're going to go through SERMAs and we're going to then look at this. It's a very high level overview of the study. So it could be like, hey, we're performing a prospective diagnostic accuracy study of ultrasound compared with CT scan for the detection of interstitial lung disease in patients following up in the respirology clinic. Very, very brief overview of your PICO, which you'll then go into more detail down the road. The next was the participants. This study is a meta research study, so participants is more about like kind of the studies that are going to be included. So here, the search strategy would be the participant identification, ethical and regulatory considerations, particularly more so from like a regulatory consideration perspective for the protocol, like is this a Health Canada or an FDA submission? The detailed methods where you go through the exact kind of things. Perfect. I'm looking at my protocol here in the list that I had to make sure that we did everything that we were meant to. The data analysis, which includes kind of your primary analysis and then secondary analysis with sample size calculation. The results templates. Now, there's two ways of doing this. So I typically do a table with all the different things that we're going to be extracting, and I put all that data there. But you can also include some of the things you're going to extract just in the actual body of your methods itself. So this is, we're going to extract this data. Or sometimes, and I've seen people do this, which can be helpful, especially if you're first starting out, is you actually write the results section just with blank data. So you'd say that the median age of participants was blank, bracket, percentage. And you can write out your entire results section without knowing what your results are, because how you've conducted your study informs the results that you put in that results section, not what the results show. So you could pre-populate your entire results section. Now, this is an interesting one that one of my mentors suggested, is to actually write the discussion in an outline form before you've done the study. And this might sound totally crazy, but I actually think it's a pretty good idea. I don't do it all the time and we didn't do it here, but I think it's a good idea. And so what you would do is you would actually create a discussion section ahead of time where you say like, all right, the first paragraph is going to be a summary of key results, X, Y, and Z result. And then what you do is you assume that the study showed what your hypothesis was. And you start outlining in bullet points, what is paragraph one going to talk about? What is paragraph two going to talk about? What is paragraph three going to talk about? And you put that ahead of time. And the reason why is we're conducting our research study because we have a hypothesis and we think our study is going to show a positive result, or it could show a positive result. If you don't think it could show a positive result, don't do the study because it's a waste of time. And so we should already have an idea about the story or the narrative that this story, this study contributes to the literature. And this is something that we can then kind of pre-populate ahead of time, which saves some time down the road. References. I'm a huge believer in like just format all your references to Vancouver style using like EndNote or whatever reference manager you're going to be using in Word. Start citing things from the get-go because then when you go to write your manuscript, you have all your references essentially already ready to go. And then any appendices. And think in advance about like what should be in your appendix. Or how many do you think you're going to have? A, B, C, D, E. What sort of things are going to go into there? Because again, that helps create the blueprint for your actual manuscript down the road. So I'm going to pause here and answer a few more questions. Yeah. Oh, can I share a screen? Was I not share my screen there? Oh no. Jen, did I miss sharing my screen there for that last bit?
No, I was seeing the screen all the
Okay, all right, good,
time.
good, good.
Yes.
So Irina saying the order authors in the protocol is very simple. First comes the one who receives the funding for the study and who is the initial author of the research hypothesis. That is the principal investigator. That's certainly one approach. I would say that sometimes, so like I'm often the principal investigator on research, but I will take the last authorship. So it depends a little bit on whether you're what branch of academia you are. Sometimes more senior authors will just take last authorships, and we often give first authorship to trainees, like medical students or residents working on research, if they're the ones driving the study. But as long as it's transparent about sorry, I'm just looking. Yeah, so as long as we're transparent about who's doing the work and what the authorship is, whatever you agree on is kind of acceptable. The worst thing though is when a trainee or somebody thinks they're going to be first author, then somebody comes in the last second and takes it. That can be really demotivating. So transparency is kind of the key point to it for sure. All right. Well, with that, I'm going to share my screen again. Do, 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 do. And let's look at a couple more things. So let's go through a couple tips. And so kind of my top 5 tips for writing a protocol, which is going to be relevant for this whole webinar series, is that we should really spend about 5 times more time writing the protocol, and then it'll save you 10 times of the headache and the time down the road. If you invest the time up front, your research will be higher quality, more likely to be published, and will actually be quicker overall. The other part to this, which is kind of unspoken, is that when you first start a research study, you have so much enthusiasm and passion and you're energetic for it. Down the road, as you're a year into the study, 2 years into the study, enthusiasm can start dwindling. And so if you've invested that time up front and like you do all the hard thinking and the hard stuff up front when you have a lot of enthusiasm, it makes the tail end when you just want the study to be done even easier, which trust me, your future self will appreciate. The second thing is figure out the details early of the protocol. Research studies don't fail based on like having a bad study idea. They fail because of the details and the logistics of the study. Most reasons why papers never end up published is that the methods suck. It's not that the idea was wrong. And so really nail the inclusion criteria, make sure you're collecting the right data, and make sure that the study's feasible. And as you start writing that protocol, especially when you go into that much detail, very quickly people are going to be able to say, oh, we actually can't get that data in our unit. So I'm just thinking about a study that we did recently where we're like, all right, we have this great protocol and we sent it out to our research assistants and research admins, and they were like, we don't have that data. We're like, what? Like we thought for sure we had that data already recorded. They're like, we would have to go through actually and prospectively collect all that data. So we actually had to rejig our research question that we are going to answer to not require that data to be included because we didn't want to have to go and prospectively collect a whole bunch of data that would have added a lot of feasibility considerations for our study. The next tip I'd say is that research protocols and just research in general is a team sport. So get feedback often and early on your protocol and aim for at least 5 rounds of revisions for any protocol. I would say that if you're like 5+ rounds of revisions, that's probably a sign that people have engaged with the protocol, they're interested, and you've probably gotten something that is going to work well for you. The next tip is publish online. It's just such an easy signal of transparency and professionalism. I love Open Science Framework because it's so quick. You just literally upload a Word document and click make public, and there you go. You've published your protocol and you can link to it super easily. Utilize best writing practices for your introduction, methods, and results while you're writing the protocol. And this is one that actually I have to really emphasize with some of the trainees I work with is like, no, like this paragraph isn't really well written. It's not well constructed. There's no topic sentence. The writing's unclear. Really nail down the writing quality from the get-go because that introduction then just becomes your entire introduction for your manuscript. And so it's not time that's being wasted. It's actually time that's being invested up front in making a polished manuscript from the get-go. And here's a bonus tip. Design a study with the outcome of the project in mind, whether that's approving a regulatory approval for a device or a drug, publishing in whatever journal it is it just going to be a conference abstract? Knowing where you're going will help you save time along the way. And so, for example, every time I start a research study, I pick a target journal that I'm going to publish it in. Sometimes I'll even reach out to editors that I know at that journal to say, hey, like I'm working on this study. Like, is this something of potential interest down the road? And the reason why is it helps ensure that you have a clear outcome that you're trying to achieve. Otherwise, you're just kind of working and then you get out the other side and you're done and you're like, now what do I do with this? And maybe it doesn't quite match the scope of the journal you thought you were going to go to, or maybe it's not quite high enough impact for the one that you were hoping for. This just really helps make sure that everything aligns throughout the entire life cycle of the research. So I'll kind of hover here for a moment while I answer a couple of questions, just to see whether or not can be doctors provide presentation, please. I'm just looking at here. So yeah, you feel free to download templates or access them here while I'm looking at some questions. So is the medical writer involved in the methodology of the study? Great question. So that depends on your background as a writer. Some medical writers are actually who have like statistics backgrounds or have research assistant backgrounds or research methodology backgrounds will actually be involved in helping provide feedback on the study methods. But many times I'd say if the pure kind of talent is in the writing itself, they may not be. So I think that depends a little bit. And can we provide a presentation? There'll be a recording of this, but not the presentation itself. But if you DM me, maybe I'll send it along. So just shoot me an email or something kind of privately, but we're not going to widely disseminate the presentation itself, more so the recording of it. All right. And so your assignment, if you choose to accept it, actually, oh, yeah, there's a few more here. 1 second. Perfect. So this webinar is great. You're going to get some information on it. Hopefully, it's helpful, but really is probably useless unless you engage with it. There's no secret way to writing a better research protocol. There's no secret way to becoming a better writer other than to write. And so, what we would highly, highly like to invite you to is actually to take this webinar series as an opportunity to write a protocol on something and to get feedback and to use these sessions as kind of like master classes where you can get specific feedback and ideas for your own protocol that you can implement as we're going along. And so what I would say is if you have a research protocol already on the go, let's work on that. If not, start a research protocol on a topic that you'd be interested in or you're planning on researching. Take one of the templates that were sent out to start with, fill it out to your best of your ability and identify any gaps, like maybe the literature in the background or any research methodological areas that you're not too sure about, and maybe read around them a little bit and bring back some sort of draft. It could be bullet point, it could be written, it could be you've downloaded the template and you've jotted down a couple ideas. Bring back something next week so that we can start refining it and building it out section by section. Yeah, Jen, any comments on that?
Yeah, I think that it is also important that for people committing to write a protocol or learning, to write a protocol, this is something that can help them grow their skills and further their career. So if you take this as a way to build experience on how to build a protocol, you will be in a much better place to say, um, you to talk about your skills when you're applying for a position. For example, Dr. Ross, he can talk more about the benefit that he has seen when some of his residents are able to talk about the protocols with other peers and look for mentorships.
Yeah, I feel like writing a protocol is a way of just expressing ideas clearly and professionally. And I think that translates to really any aspect of academic writing, be that applying for grants, writing a manuscript, writing a protocol, applying for jobs, and being able to very, very clearly present yourself. And so I hope that, and what I've seen with trainees that have taken this on is that as their writing gets better in this domain, it also helps them with their other aspects in their professional life. And so hopefully by participating, yeah, you will learn some skills that will be transferable not just to writing protocols, but also academic writing and writing in a professional setting more generally.
Yes. There's another question about which template do we use for a pre-post cohort study?
Yeah, so you'd use the observational template because pre-post cohort study is unless you did an intervention. So if you did like a pre-post cohort where it's just purely observational, you could do the observational study. But if you did an intervention, then it wouldn't really be a cohort. It would be like a pseudo randomized control trial or pseudo interventional trial, and then you would use the RCT, but you'd have to modify it pretty heavily. But most of the time, and what I think you're referring to is probably an observational template.
Okay, thank you. There is another question. Can MDs work in medical writer roles? And we have
Yes.
seen it's a very good role for doctors to be because they'll bring their insight, their knowledge. They just need the writing part to be able to know what to write about.
Yes, definitely. And I think that with some tools as well, I think being a medical writer and writing with really high quality is becoming easier. Um, you know what? We're going to talk about AI in this course because everyone's talking about AI. I love
Mhm.
AI. I work on AI. I think that the biggest role of AI in medical writing is to take the ideas that we have in our heads as researchers or as research assistants or as doctors and to get them out clearly. But the problem is you have to do that. You can't just tell the AI to do that. You have to really coach the AI
Yes.
and know what good writing looks like. You have to understand what structure you want for your documents. You have to understand how you should be writing in terms of tone and voice and all that stuff. And then if you provide all of that context to the AI can actually often do a pretty good job at getting the ideas in your head into a pretty good structure that you can then edit from. But hopefully this webinar series really will emphasize what's important to make high quality research protocols, which translates to manuscripts, which translates to grants, and then you can use that as a medical writer to enhance your productivity. You can use AI. And a great transition, Ross and Jen, into something that we're working on. So we're working on an AI writing tool for Word that you can actually just plug into Word, and then can essentially it's your co-pilot to hopefully help structure, like write an abstract, continue on this next paragraph here. And we're looking for beta users, so it's not yet released to the public. By the end of this course, it probably will be more broadly released. But if this is something that you might be interested in checking out, signing up for, playing around and providing some feedback on, you can kind of sign up here for that. It's free. And then it probably won't be for August, so you'll probably have access sometime at the end of the month or early September. But then if you give us feedback, we're happy to have you keep using it after, and we can discount it and chat about what works for you. So I appreciate it if any of you are interested in this, and you can just sign up here. And then, so I guess at this point, I would say that if you want to sign up for the manuscript templates, there's the QR code. If you want to sign up for that beta, there's the QR code on the right. And we'll just kind of answer questions. And other than that, we'll see you next week for focusing on the introduction. And so again, the assignment before then is pick a topic for a protocol, something that interests you or something that you could work on. Take one of the templates, try to fill in as much as you can and read about some of the areas that you might not know about just to kind of get a bit more background knowledge. Maybe write down some questions as well as part of it. Are there any things that are really pressing your mind? And then we'll come back and we'll start working on it.
Okay, sounds great. There's another question here. If you have a few minutes, for those of us that are new to this for the first time, how do we go about it?
Yeah, it's not easy, right? That's what I'd say. Like, it's really tough to start this from zero. And so, what I would say is reflect on like your work setting or where you hope to work. So, let's say you're a physician wanting to do medical writing, and you want to do medical writing in a pharmaceutical capacity. This is just an example. I would think about, all right, what would be my dream pharmaceutical company I could work for? What would be a topic that they would be writing about? Google that, ChatGPT that, whatever, and think about, all right, what would be a protocol related to that? Oh, all right, it would be a randomized controlled trial, a pilot drug study looking in healthy volunteers testing a new drug, a new blood thinner. I'm totally making this up. I would then take that idea and make a protocol for it. So take anything that you think is going to be the most useful in your life. If you're a nephrologist, pick something about the kidney. If you're writing a grant on strokes, pick a stroke topic. Pick something directly related to your next step in your career, and then spend time writing that protocol. Because as part of writing your protocol, you're going to learn about the background. You're going to be reviewing the literature. You're going to be understanding some of the knowledge gaps in your field. So take this opportunity as a guided tour of a topic that you think knowing more about will be beneficial for you professionally. That's what I would say.
Okay, and I think it's important to think about the intent of the protocol that you're writing. Is a protocol that is based on research that is going to stay in academia, or is it a protocol that is going to be uh, going into clinical trials, meaning that there is something that is going to be tested and you're looking to get that tested. Most of the protocols that I work with, or all of them, are from clinical trials, meaning that they are protocols that have been approved and they're ready to be tested. A part that is important for us, doctors and researchers, is to understand the breakdown of the protocol, to know how to read them, to know how to follow them, and know all the components, because this is what is going to guide the research that we do at a site level. So I know many of you are interested in breaking into clinical research to work as research coordinator and continue to grow like a medical monitoring. For those roles, it's important that you know the protocol. If
Hmm.
you are in medical monitoring or director of operation, they will ask you to contribute to writing to the protocol. So the protocol is not a one person only kind of job. It's a multiple persons, and there are going to be different stakeholders. You can take in consideration the patients, you can take in consideration the sites that are running the protocol. So when you're writing the protocol, you also going to think, where is this protocol going? Who's the person that is going to be reading and following this protocol? Like if you have a recipe to bake a cake, you want to break it down so the person can bake the cake exactly the way that it's supposed to, and that
Hmm.
ensure that the outcome or the cake that we get, the data that we get is a good value. Like we don't want a protocol that people follow and different people get different cakes. No, everyone needs to get the same outcome. Everything is very detailed, and it is a lot process. When things go wrong, I think somebody asked what happened if a protocol is written wrong. That leads to amendment, and that costs a lot of money because that will take the sponsor to go on and review what's the problem with the protocol, what's not working, what's not clear, and that can paralyze a study from going on. So I think it's a lot to dig in for the first class, and we will be willing to answer your questions. There's a Facebook group where you can bring your questions there, post it there during the week, and then we can go review those and continue to answer. I hope that everyone have a great time. I appreciate everybody for coming, and then please read the emails that are being sent. The emails will be sent with information that you need and for more resources for you to continue to do this. This is not something that you need to do it alone, and that's the reason why we're doing this in a 5-week seminar. So you start today with us, you start doing this primer, and then you can continue step by step on getting things done. I know it's difficult. Like many of you said, it's not mission impossible because others have done it. Okay. So let's have the attitude that we can and then figure out how we can do it this together. Okay. So if everyone agree, just send me a yes in the chat so I know where you are. And then we can be ready to say goodbyes because Dr. Prager, he has patient to see.
Thanks, everyone. That was so much fun. Really looking forward to this. And yeah, I just echo what Jen says. We do it. We do this not because it's easy, but because it's hard, right? That's why we have to do it. And I promise you that I've struggled for thousands of hours at this point writing protocols and research studies. It gets easier, but there's no way around it. So we might as well start now while there's support and mentorship and a community of people that are also going to be going through the same thing. And so definitely echo what Jen says about posting to the community and leveraging that as a way to build the momentum that hopefully propels you to where you want to be in life.